Thanks very much for joining me today, Russ. Great to have you on for the next instalment of Charting the Best course. First of all, could you please introduce yourself and give us a little bit of background as your current industry role and your experience?
Hi, it's great to be here again, Felicity. Russ Miller, I'm the Vice President of Sales and Marketing with Enzene. I've been with Enzene for about 3 years now. I've been in the CDMO industry, it's going on 25 years. I did the calculation at DCAT. That's always a fun calculation to do. But I started off my career as a scientist doing research and development. I spent about 17 years at Catalent, across various roles supporting clinical and commercial programs for large and small molecules. So nice to be here.
Brilliant, thank you. Historically, we've seen that there's been a tendency to equate scale with volume within the biopharma industry. But we're now seeing that shift a little bit towards intensity instead. So from your experiences, could you maybe discuss how continuous manufacturing might allow companies to scale out rather than scale up, and what that means for the life cycle management of a biologic in particular?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. When you're looking at capacity in the industry, I would say historically, cost of goods are always an important component to the drug product manufacturing. And in the original set of biologics, you had really good therapies, but also required a fairly large dose. And so when you combine a therapy that has a global impact and a requirement for a large dose, you can see how the industry scaled in progression for building out fed batch processes from 2,000 to 5,000 to 10,000 to 15,000 to 20,000 to 35,000 liters. And I think, when in the initial days, perfusion was a good technology. It created products consistently, but the challenge in the early stage, from my view, is the microbial ingress, and that risk could be and was mitigated by moving to a fed batch. And so when you look at the risk mitigation strategies and the challenges 20 years ago, fed batch just made a lot of sense. And so but when you look at the state of technology today, and the growth of titers and cell lines, and when you look at the different tools that teams have available to them for manufacturing an intensified process, we have a greater flexibility in that manufacturing. And when you can utilize an intensified process, whether it's an N-1 intensification or a continuous manufacturing process, you can create an output that is the requirement for a given therapeutic, and you can have less of an impact on the capital outlay necessary to build out these plants, maintain these plants, and potentially even have more flexibility in how you manage your commercial supply. So to me, the evolution of advanced bioprocessing points us in the direction of continuous. And if I just give a quick allegory, right, we'll use automobiles. 100 years ago, manufacturing an automobile was a very skilled process. It's still skilled, but there were very few people that could put an automobile together because they had to machine everything, right? And so they put it together one at a time in a mechanic shop. And then you had Ford come along and said, hey, this is pretty cool. Let's put all this on an assembly line, continuous, right? And I think this alludes to a conversation later in the question deck. But you move from a single point of manufacture to a continuous. Why? More efficient, more effective, more scalable. So, I think we're starting to potentially march into that inflection point in the bioprocessing manufacturing for drug substance.
You mentioned there about being able to sort of flexibly manage supply. We've seen the fragility of the supply chains within the industry have been exposed over recent years in particular. I mean, you've kind of alluded to this a little bit anyway, but how does the compact or modular nature of continuous manufacturing enable maybe more decentralized manufacturing strategies that batch processing couldn't, we couldn't support that with batch processing in the past?
Yeah. So, I mean, what is the one of the biggest challenges to 20,000, 30,000, 15,000 liter bioreactors? It takes a lot of skill, time, and effort and capital to put these facilities in place. I mean, they're just, while you could conceive of a design for what you would want to do to implement that design, takes anywhere from 4 to 5 years, and then you have to have a skill base available to be able to take advantage of that. And so, we're not talking about 50 million. I mean, we're talking about 500, 600, 700. I mean, yeah, I guess if you wanted to just do a 2,000 liter bioreactor or single use, you might only need to spend a couple hundred million to put that facility in place, but that's still a lot of money. And so when you can utilize an advanced bioprocessing technology that has a much more compact footprint, whether it's 1,500 square feet, 2,000 square feet, or if we were in the other system of fun, 150 meters squared, 200 meters squared, then you have a facility that is much more efficient in space. It's much more capital efficient, and depending on the actual process itself, you have scalability that gives you output potential that might be the exact amount of material you would need for localized or regional manufacturing. And then if you can plug it in to a network that's already existing, and what do I mean by that? I mean, you have a team of support in the background that's developed the process, validated the process, and can simply tech transfer it. You have enabled regionalized manufacturing to enable that country, that region, to be able to support materials, especially in terms of crisis elements like we saw in COVID, where they don't have to rely on these hubs of manufacturing that exist in Asia or Europe or the US. I mean, it's not to say that other places don't have biologics, drug substance, but there are a lot of countries that do not have it. And so, and they're looking at ways of how can we efficiently, effectively mobilize resources to create biologics, drug substance capability in our region in a way that makes sense and that, frankly, they can afford, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You alluded to there about the, facility footprint is obviously a big positive for continuous manufacturing.
Yep.
Flexible with the supply chain and all those sorts of things. Versus batch manufacturing, are there any particular areas that you think companies are seeing the biggest gains, from your experiences within the industry?
You mean in terms of intensified manufacturing?
Yes.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, the biggest gain is if you can have an intensified process that operates in a 150 meters squared or 1,500 square foot, and it gives you the same output as a 10,000 liter bioreactor. That efficiency drives directly down into cost of goods. And so, what does that mean? That means that teams can take existing plant and they can reconfigure it to an intensified process at a much lower capital outlay than having to basically scrap a plant and do a rebuild. And what do I mean by that? If you have a 10,000 liter bioreactor, that's a stainless steel fixed in place process. So the only way that is changing is if you completely strip that process out. Now, if you have an advanced bioprocessing technology, such as our NZNX fully connected continuous manufacturing technology, that has modularity built into it, then you can essentially have one footprint, one very compact space that can allow you to customize more readily your output demand with your commercial supply forecast. And so if that means a 10,000 liter bioreactor, well, that means a 1,000 liter bioreactor in our system, right? If you need only a 3 by 2 KLs worth of output, well, that's a 500 liter bioreactor in our system. And that is the most simplest equation that can come into play. But there's more to it than just that, because especially if you're on a continuous platform where you've set the design space to be able to manufacture at 25, 30, or 35 days, well, not only can I customize my output based on my bioreactor size, I can further customize my output based on the time that I take to do that manufacturing. Does that make sense? I mean, there's multi levels to advanced bioprocessing that I don't know that everyone fully recognizes and potentially appreciates. I mean, when you have a 10,000 liter bioreactor, it's a fed batch process. That's a fixed asset and isn't changing unless you rip it out, and you get to make what you make in 20 days, plus or minus a day. I mean, and that's not a lot of plus or minus. So you pretty much have a fixed output. Where when you have an advanced bioprocessing technology like the NZNX platform, not only can you customize the bioreactor size to scale your output very quickly, right? These are single-use bioreactors, so they're roll in, roll out. I can also customize my output based on how long I manufacture. So it's a lot of flexibility that you build into your future commercial supply and honestly, lifecycle management.
Yeah, that's great. And obviously that those benefits are going to help companies decide on putting that initial investment into a continuous manufacturing line, rather than having the traditional batch fed one. What about the tech transfer, though, which I know some companies might be a bit daunted by? What would you say to company decision makers about that in terms of continuous
Well,
manufacturing?
sure. I mean, we're in a traditionalist environment, and people don't like change. And why is that? Because it's a highly regulated environment, and you know when you bring something new into the environment, you have to help the regulators understand that you still have control of the process. And I mean, there's nothing crazy about it. It's just when you have the new, that means you have to make sure it's well defined and you have the right data sets to ensure that the regulatory agencies understand what you're doing. In our case, for advanced bioprocessing, there's literally nothing new in the component set that is different. And does it take a bit of a different skill set than a fed batch? A little bit, right? I mean, you're talking about how do you manage a continuous process, and so you have to upskill folks from how they manage a fed batch process with how you manage a continuous process. But that for a team that's already doing bioprocessing, that upskill is not super difficult. It's actually fairly straightforward. And Enzine, I think, is in a unique position because we actually run an academy in house, and it's not a 1 week. Hey, how do you do a pipette? It's not a 2 week like, hey, we now know how to do pipette, and we know how to write records in your SOP. No, it's a full on coursework that is several months long. That helps people go from basic bioprocessing skills to advanced bioprocessing. And so, that skill up, that investment is much more manageable than if your choice is, do I spend $1 billion to add a 20,000 liter bioreactor manufacturing plant that's a fixed asset whose output is never going to change, and I will always have to fill it with 20,000 liters, and I can never modify that ever again? Or do you want to take an advanced bioprocessing technology, such as the NZNext platform, that has modularity and output flexibility and output scale that aligns to, being able to supply a product on a global market in the hundreds to 200s to 300s kilogram plus, demand requirement? So what I would say is, yeah, it's an important element to recognize, but it's not insurmountable. And if I'm doing a comparative analysis on where my risk lies and my challenge points are for a team that already does bioprocessing, that skill up is that small of a challenge versus the investment issue, which is that big versus, an advanced bioprocessing investment. So I think it's important to recognize that it's a necessity, but it shouldn't be a limiting factor.
Yeah, great. You said there as well that you're obviously working as a company to help with that skill up. But there is a skills gap, I feel, within the industry. We are noticing that we're not getting maybe as many people coming through from universities and things like that. So, from a leadership perspective, what do you think industry should be doing to help kind of get rid of that skills gap? I mean, you're already doing the work there by having those facilities and training and helping that, but how can we get more people interested, do you think, into the area?
Well, yes, we're doing it internally because we recognize that there's a need to enhance the skill base for bioprocessing. And I think, as an industry, what we can do is engage, right? Engage with university, engage at conference, highlight what that demand profile looks like, you know, help educate universities on what the skill set is so that they can define the programs for the need. I mean, here in North Carolina, 18 years ago, oh goodness, right? You had universities like North Carolina State, Campbell, and the industry in this area actively engaged and said, "Hey, we see that you're doing a good job in chemistry and chemical engineering, and that's awesome. But what we really need is we need people trained on manufacturing skill sets that operate in a highly regulated environment in a GMP space." And this is what that skill sets could look like. So for us as industry and leaders, it's a little bit of education back into academia to help them understand what it is that we need. And once the universities understand that, they're like, "Oh, wow, okay, cool." And now you have, all across the U.S., universities that put this in place for the small molecule space, and it really just needs to be upgraded to support the bioprocessing arena. Because as we move forward, right, the number of chemical entities coming into new development are being dominated by new biological entities versus new chemical entities. And so advanced bioprocessing isn't going to go away. In fact, it's just going to get more innovative as time goes on. We have a cool way to do it, but will somebody else think of an even more exciting way to do bioprocessing? Absolutely. I mean, I think, what we're doing now is not how we're going to be making biologics in 20 years.
Brilliant. I'm going to ask you to carry on that thread of looking to the future and ask you if you believe that batch manufacturing might maybe be seen as the kind of legacy niche for specific modalities, or do you think that we're going to continue with a kind of batch and continuous sort of hybrid model as we're moving forward? Is there any potential factor that you think could tip the scales towards continuous becoming the industry standard?
Well, I think anybody who's talked to me in any length of time probably knows what I think about all that. But yeah, so you've got thousands and thousands of liters of capacity in a fed batch, and and none of that's instantly going to go away. And I think it'll be here for, not indefinitely, but for a period of time. Do I think that we will transition away from fed batch and utilize advanced bioprocessing? Absolutely, without a doubt. There's too many gains to be realized, and the folks that are holding on to fed batch as the gold standard, um, I all I can share with them is the data. We have data, years of data that demonstrate that we can take fed batch processes, we can put them into a continuous mode, and we can realize benefits in product quality, uh, efficiency, productivity, reduction in cost of goods that you can achieve in a fed batch. And it's only going to get better for advanced bioprocessing, and it's only going to be more challenging for a fed batch. I mean, I'll just go back to my one annotation I had earlier, which is customizing the duration of your batch, right? I mean, what do you want to achieve in manufacturing? Efficiency, absolute efficiency. What's efficient? Well, I'm going to make a drug substance. Well, that drug substance has to go to a drug product. And if I can make one drug substance batch that fits the drug product need at a given run, so I go from A to B and my output is C to the client or the customer or the patient, and I can do that connected and singularly, well, that's amazing, right? What does that actually mean? What that means is for all my SKUs, I need 7 kilograms of material. Okay, cool. Well, I have a fed batch process. It produces 4.8. Oh, well, that's sad. Now I'm going to have to make 2 batches. Okay, well, that's not so bad, right? I make 2 batches and I can save I can save the extra, but you'll always be out of sync. And anytime you have to save anything, well, that's a risk. I mean, that means I have to put it in storage. That's not ideal. But what if I could take and utilize an advanced bioprocessing and take that 4.8 kilograms and just go ding, 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 ding. I'm just going to run it for a little bit longer because that's in my design space. And I've got that CQA or Q. I've got that controlled as a part of my process validation. Well, cool. Now I can produce my 7 kilograms. Bingo. And because I've utilized my facility for, instead of 15 days, might be 20 days, I've intrinsically done it more efficiently. So drug substance, more efficient. Drug product, super efficient. So now it's 1-to-1. And so, when you can look at that kind of customization, that kind of flexibility, it's really hard for me to see how folks will not be weeding out fed batch and replacing it with more advanced bioprocessing capabilities that give them more flexibility and demand. I mean, think about it in this way, right? Capacity utilization is super important. And if I can maintain my capacity utilization because I can modularly put in bioreactors at given sizes to do life cycle management, again, I'm driving more efficiency into my process, more efficiency into my plant, and it just makes a lot of sense. So, is your question, will fed batch go away? Yeah, it will. Is it going to go away tomorrow? No, it won't. I mean, these plants have 20, 30 years on them, so we're going to see fed batch for decades to come. But there will be a tipping point where they will go away. Could there be an event that basically makes a team go, you know what, we really need to just sell this plant and move completely over here? It's very likely. I mean, when you look at drug pricing today, it's hard for everybody because governments want prices to be moderated so patients have access, and you have all kinds of initiatives everywhere around that. And so, ADCs, let's talk about that for just a quick hot second, right? ADCs are for cancer patients, and those therapies cost a lot of money. But those and traditionally the team making the ADC doesn't really care about how much the antibody costs. Don't care, because our therapy is going to be so expensive. Doesn't really matter. Does it cost me $3,000 a gram to get my antibody? Yeah, okay, whatever. Well, that thought process is going to change. That it's not going to be blasé about like, oh, my antibody is like $3,000. That's going to be more like, it's what? No, you can't do that no more. You have to have a more effective manufacturing, because the cost of therapy is going to come down, and that impact is also going to change the dynamic.
Absolutely. Well, thank you ever so much for talking to me today, Russ. It's been wonderful, as always.
Yeah, absolutely. Pleasure to have the conversation. I think there's always a lot to say in continuous. I mean, as you can imagine, I think we have a fantastic technology platform, but the reality is that other teams are going to be coming up with other advanced bioprocessing, and I think that there's a lot of innovation ahead of us in the space, and I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities for folks to make a difference and ultimately positively impact patients' lives.